Jim Kelter, United States Army, Vietnam. Jim is one of my many unsung heroes. His story's been sitting in my archives almost 20 years, although he's featured in my film Vietnam Remembered. Now it's time to share his complete story right here on the Voices of History YouTube channel. Jim, like I said, is one of my unsung heroes. Huey helicopters in Vietnam. Actually one of the early pioneers with the 11th Air Assault Division in Vietnam. He fought in the Ia Drang Valley, which was made famous by Mel Gibson in the movie We Were Soldiers, from the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Just a great story from his eyes and ears, his perspective from the air. I'm so happy to share his story today with you. He, like I said, was one of the early pioneers in Vietnam. He was the B Company, 1st of the 5th Air Cav, the Air Mobile Division. When President Johnson ordered the Air Mobile Division to Vietnam in July of '65, he was there. So, Jim, God bless you, he's still with us at 81. I think he's in his early 60s when I interviewed him. In Omaha, Nebraska, it was January 15th, 2006, almost 18 years ago, folks. And like I said, he's 81 today, still with us, going strong. So God bless you, Jim. Thank you for telling me your story. I want to thank Matt Shanku for sponsoring this story. Matt, thank you for stepping forward, sir, and supporting my work and helping others to learn about Vietnam through the eyes and ears of Jim Kelter. Thank you for your commitment to our veterans, Matt, and to our country, and for watching my YouTube channel at work. God bless you, sir. I salute you. And folks, if you'd like to sponsor a story like Matt, there's information in the video description or on my website, larrycappetto.com. Please, I encourage you to do this. Go to my website, click on Sponsor a Vet. You'll see pictures of my veterans. Just include their name in the sponsorship, and I'll do the rest. A lot of you like to just donate to my work. That's fine. I appreciate it. I encourage it. This is listener and viewer supported. It's like my radio station. There's information in the comment section of every comment, of every video that has comments. They all have comments. First comment's always mine. So just look at it, click on that link, and then you can make a donation to my work. And I would really appreciate it. Just help pay it forward, folks. Thanks for watching and listening. I'm happy to share Jim Kelter's story in living color with you folks as he remembers Vietnam from his perspective, from his eyes and his ears. We'll learn more about the Vietnam War. So God bless you. Thank you for watching these videos, sharing this channel, and realizing the educational value of the work that I've done and how some are trying to erase this history. Well, this is not going to ever be erased. And I want to once again thank everybody that's helped support this channel. I don't say it enough. God bless you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're just going to go back and talk about Vietnam, and the reason I'm excited, Jim, is because I've read Hal Moore's book, and I've seen the movie We Were Soldiers, and I've got a friend in Boston. His name's Paul Clifford. He's an attorney, and he's friends with Larry Gwynn, and Bruce Crandall and that whole group, and they don't want to talk to me because they've pretty much. And I thought, well, okay, I knew someday I'm going to talk to somebody, so I'm not after the blood and guts of war. I'm really wanting just to tell what it was like, and so I would just like to talk with you about Vietnam and what you faced at Ia Drang in '65, and my real fascination, I think, right now is the helicopters and how they were used, and the workhorse, the Hueys. Sure. And so those are kind of the questions I'll be asking and talking to you about. But just give me just tell me who you're with, and give me a division, regiment, company, however that breaks down in Vietnam.
Okay. Well, we. Before we went to Vietnam, we were a unit called the 11th Air Assault Division, which was really kind of the beginnings of the helicopter warfare. And once we got the word that we were going into Nam, the specialized training became more focused on basically jungle-type warfare. And our unit was called B Company, 1st to the 5th Air Cav, and Air Mobile. And we would spend a lot of time with training exercises entirely different than being just on the ground and foot soldiers. We would get in helicopters and fly. Each squad would fly into a particular area go through a mock assault as if we were assaulting a village, and be picked up on the other side and be gone before the enemy could ever react to anything. So it was really incredible, and the incredible thing about it, it was the wear and tear on us was not quite as bad as walking through mile after jungle. We were airlifted. In fact, they had what they called eagle flights, where we would fly in a helicopter formation and just hover in certain areas until some type of action was taking place or there was an enemy sighting, and then they would fly us directly into that area. So it was a little harrowing at times because you never knew what you were going to get when you got there, and a lot of times because of the noise, the enemy heard us coming before they saw us, and so they were gone if they thought that they were outnumbered. So, it seemed to be a hit and miss operation, mostly miss for the first few months over there because we were all draftees, so we didn't have really any stake in a career in the Army. But they wanted to see, before we left the service, they wanted to see how we'd perform under combat conditions, and we certainly got our share of the action toward the end. The last month we were involved, and that was the Yadrang Valley, and our company was split up. We loaned a company to another unit that was basically patrolling along the Chupong Mountains, right along the Yadrang River there, and one of the groups, the commander was dropping artillery rounds and just walking them in front of that group as they proceeded so they could avoid any type of thing like an ambush. The next commander did not do that, and that's when all hell broke loose. And I think we had a number of checkpoints around their landing zones. I think one was Columbus and one was Albany. And the unit that got ambushed they were laying in wait at a landing zone for these guys, and they were tired. They were very lax. A lot of mistakes were made. The enemy was like right in their lap, and they didn't know it. And they were sitting down and eating lunch and reading their letters from home. And there was a machine gun nest about 30 yards away from the majority of that unit, and they started mowing them down, captured our mortars. We were about probably 3 miles away guarding an artillery base. So obviously, a company of men, we didn't have very many people either. But when we got the word, we were told to get over there in a hurry, and we literally ran to get over there and got pinned down on the edge. And they fired mortars at us. We lost quite a few of our people without even seeing the enemy. You couldn't see them. They were pinned or tied into trees. And one of our guys took the tracer rounds. I don't know if you're familiar with the machine guns, but it's about 1 every 4 is a tracer round. He took those, broke the ammunition pouch down, and started putting tracer rounds in there and firing into the trees so we could see where they were. And then we started firing grenade launchers and started beating them back. Fortunately for us, the enemy overestimated our capabilities because we didn't have that many people. They thought maybe we were, evening up the numbers because we were outnumbered probably 3, 4, 5 to 1, who knows. And during the night, they came down out of the trees and they dragged any of the wounded they could find of the Americans and shot them, and then took off the next morning, and they were gone by the time we came through. But it was, as you probably know, it was just a bloody battlefield. People were mangled, and we were carrying them in body bags across the fields to helicopters, and dead weight. I mean, it was a eerie sight because a lot of the people we knew, and even the ones that we knew very well and had partied with, you couldn't recognize because they had been, I wouldn't say tortured, but had been shot either in the head or were hit with high-powered ammunition. So napalm was involved in that. I don't think too many of ours got it because they were dropping it on top of the enemy. But and there were a lot of enemy bodies, of course. But it was nasty, and once we policed the bodies, then we went back to our original base camp. And the Viet Cong were a little disorganized themselves. They had scattered all over in the tunnels and all over the valley there. And a good share of them were waiting for us to come back. They were ready to hit the artillery camp, and we happened to walk back in. So about 4 o'clock that afternoon, the battle started all over again, and we were outnumbered again about 3 to 1. Fortunately, Air Force came in, dropped some bombs, and really saved our butts because we were in a lot of trouble. We were expected to be overrun, and had they not cleared that out a little bit, we probably would have been.
Tell me just about how the first air cav came about, how it came into being, and what it was patterned off it or whatever.
Well, I think there's, because of the nature of Vietnam, it was different than Korea in World War II in that there really were no battle lines. There was not, okay, don't come across this line, and the enemy was everywhere from the beginning of South Vietnam down south around Saigon up all the way to Hanoi. So I think that entered into the strategy of finding a way to lift troops and get them into an area quickly. Because of the nature of the battle. If you're again, if you're ambushed, you probably don't even see the enemy. All you can feel are the bullets, and there needs to be a way in with heavy foliage like we had in the Central Highlands. Same way, of course, down in the jungle too, around south of Saigon. It was very difficult, probably in close fighting. So we were able the basic idea would be to take us into an area, find a landing zone, drop us off, and let us patrol from that point for a few miles, try to encounter the enemy, and then be picked up at a fairly close location. And if we didn't find anybody, then we go somewhere else and try it again. Getting into those areas a lot of times, which is obviously we did a lot of repelling out of the Hueys. And that would be generally getting into an area over a rice paddy, 5-6 feet off the ground, jumping into the paddy and then heading out. So again, with no roads to speak of, we were in all kinds of tough conditions to move around in and to be somewhat mobile. So air mobile was a wonderful concept, even from the standpoint of taking our artillery and rounds with us. They could carry a good share of that with different types of helicopters, maybe the Chinook. Ours was mainly the Huey, which is, the prototype for Black Hawk.
But back in the States, do you remember when Johnson ordered the air mobile to Vietnam in July of '65?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, did this group of people come together and it was called the First Air Cab? I mean, again, back in the States, wasn't that I heard General Custer was the horses, and then now you got the air cab with the patch. So
Yep.
Explain the history of that real quick.
Well, again, we were 11th Air Assault, which was just another. It was going to be a special unit, and then after they started seeing what was going on in Vietnam, then it became the First Air Cavalry, and we were made up of the same people that were in the 11th Air Assault were First Air Cav, because we had been trained to repel. Some repelling down cliffs, but most of the repelling was out of a helicopter, just basically just dropping out and getting to the ground as quickly as you could. We did some exercises in North Carolina, or maybe it was South Carolina. I guess it was South Carolina. As a way, it was a basically war game to test the mobility, and we did a little bit of repelling, but a lot of it was just simulations of going into a village and cleaning it out and getting up on the other side. When we first got to Vietnam, we did mostly foot patrols in the area for the first 10, 15 days, but our base camp was on K. And then once we started expanding out, that's when we started doing a lot of the use of the helicopter to get into area, get in and out of areas. A lot of times in the middle of it, as I say, or sometimes when it was suspected BC activity, they would fly us in near dark, and then we would start setting up our little camp and then patrol out from there, taking 9-10-man teams out into an area. Can you, Jim, kind of step by step, can you walk me through one of the missions with the Huey of how you rendezvous, you get on the Huey, who's on there, a gunner, a pilot, flying into, let's say, an LZ or hot LZ, and then explain to me about how you're getting off, and then just take me on a mission, how that works. Well, they would take our squad, for example. We could basically, you would have riflemen, then you'd have a machine gunner with his assistant who would carry the ammunition and help with the load. Generally, those people would stick together. So, you're looking at 9-10-man squads. So you'd have 4 of them, which would make up a company. And then we would all go in as a unit. So they would pick an area. We'd get briefed on basically hitting the LZ, depending on the type of terrain. Sometimes it was on top of a mountain where there were elephant grass. So you'd have to get in and secure the LZ as soon as you get there, and then wait for the others to come in after you. So they'd fly in 4 different groups. And then once we were all together, that we'd get organized, and then we would take off in a certain direction for a certain number of miles. The sometimes designated village areas we would be going to, others it would be just scouting the terrain to see what was there, because the up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I mean, they were moving constantly, and you could sometimes in small bands, and sometimes you'd run into regular North Vietnamese units. Most of our fighting was with the Viet Cong. We would, in fact, during the day, we'd see the villagers. They mingle in around us, and we knew they were BC. We had, in fact, I got a haircut one day from a guy, and the next day they arrested him for being BC, obviously. And so they knew exactly where we were at all times. We didn't have any idea where they were, but that was the main operation, was just basically flying into a designated location, either be given a village to strafe, and we would go in, not always going in with the idea of sweeping it out, just going in to see what was there. And you could usually tell if you go in and there are no, all that's there are women and children, then you know basically what's going on there. We didn't get down into the tunnels, thank God, but we got into a lot of areas where we could smell dead bodies. We knew they had buried their dead somewhere. We just we weren't really into the idea of finding them. We were basically looking for living people, the enemy. So that's primarily what we were doing. And again, we were only there for about a 6-month period, because we were all, I think the thing that accelerated our withdrawal from Vietnam was the fact that many of those killed in the Ia Drang Valley were guys that should have been out of there 2 or 3 days beforehand. Their time of service was over. And I think with all of us being, and we had probably 60 to 70% casualties from either malaria or wounded. And so I think they thought it would be a good idea to get the rest of us back. And so we shipped out from there, went back to our base camp, and then was then transferred into Saigon.
Did you go into hot LZs?
I think only one time we got into a hot LZ, and that's primarily because of BC. Well, the area wasn't clear. It would just be something that, part of the natural landscape. And if there was a clearing, be it tall elephant grass, be it rice paddy, the VC would hang around on the outskirts of it, anticipating our arrival. And only once did that ever happen. It happened to the unit that came in ahead of us, the 101st Airborne, and they were a little undisciplined at the time. And it would have happened to us, I'm sure too. When they landed, they started drawing fire, and they started firing up all their ammunition, and basically ran out of ammunition, and ended up taking severe casualties before they could get reinforcements in there. And that's something that we had been trained, and they had been trained to do, but easier said than done. When you're under duress, especially the first time you're under fire, it's frightening, very frightening, especially when you don't see the enemy. That's the scary part. So the one time we were just, we took fire right away, and I think it was basically a fire and fall back for the Viet Cong, because they knew they were outnumbered. But they inflicted a little bit of damage, but not much, and we got reinforcements right away, air support, and so it went away. But most of the time, it was pretty obvious where you were going. We're flying around. We don't have a destination on an Eagle flight, so they are flying around looking for a place to either land or wait till they get a note to go to a designated area where there is a suspected enemy. But but you'll see them all over, especially obviously when you're flying. You can pick out several places where it'd be good to set down. So most of those areas weren't cleared. If we were coming into our own base camp, we had cleared those fields of fire, and so we had a special landing area which was secured.
Did you see the movie We Were Soldiers?
Yes.
Was it like that?
To a certain degree, yeah. I mean, the getting at night in one unit getting separated from the rest, that was true. I think a little bit of it was fabricated to the standpoint it wasn't, some of the battles weren't that intense. Because again, it was, ambushes are not designed to last more than, a couple of hours, if that. Actually, 5 minutes, if it's a bad one, then it's going to be over, one way or the other. we didn't see what happened. I know that our unit probably couldn't have been more than a couple of hundred that was in that area, and they had, I don't know how many they had, over 1,000 that was swamping them. So it wasn't going to be pretty, but we with our air support, it kind of neutralized things a little bit. That late that night, one of our units went out into the valley and tried to find those people who were separated. So there wasn't a lot of night activity where it was just close hand to hand or anything like that. It was basically any movement started would draw fire, and that was one of the purposes of the Viet Cong, was to try to find out where your automatic weapons are, and then they take you out. But they did, but I think they did a fairly good job with names and places and things like that, and you kind of got the drift of that battle, that it was definitely a major ambush where we were outnumbered. But some of the memories that all of us have, you could put four of us in this room and you get four different stories.
What was your rank at the time?
Specialist 4.
And what was your MOS?
Basically infantry.
Okay, infantry. Okay, Specialist 4. Okay, so you were there during the Yadrang,
Mm-hmm.
and then after. The movie shows like 3 days, and then afterwards, I know there was fighting afterward. Was that Albany, or what was the fighting?
That I'm not clear about, because we moved. We were there for 3 days, and then they moved us north up the valley. And interestingly enough, one of the guys that was in the Ia Drang in our unit was separated from us, and this is a true story. Very young, and he was lying in the woods, and he had taken a grenade round and had blown off all of his fingers. And when the North Vietnamese came through, there was a very, very young North Vietnamese soldier, and he saw him and picked his rifle up and aimed it at him, and the guy held up his hand and the fingers were all blown off, and the guy dropped his rifle and walked through and let him live. And this guy made his way, I don't know how many miles up the valley we went, say 10 or 12, and about a week later, he walked in. So I don't know how he found us, because if I were going anywhere, it would have been south rather than north. So he may have been disoriented, but when he was, other than being dehydrated and all the undernourished, all those things, he was fine.
What kind of weapon did you carry?
I carried an M16.
Okay, can you give me an instance where you encountered the enemy yourself with your platoon or your squad, and the resistance, and just what you're firing at and all that?
Well, when we came back from the ambush in the Ia Drang, we were just sitting down to have supper. Sea rations, not anything warm. And I had left my helmet on my foxhole, by my foxhole. And then we heard what we had done, and unbeknownst to some of us, that one of our sergeants had gone out with 2 men. Basically, it's an observation post during the day, and then at night it would be a listening post. And he had dropped them into a foxhole out on our flank. And one of his cardinal sins was that he didn't tell anybody else where they were, and then came back. When the firing started, he panicked and went back behind our lines, and we couldn't get him out of his foxhole, and he couldn't get him to tell us where they were. And at that time, we kind of figured that we were coming under fire. We thought it was test firing of weapons. And we were about 2 weeks away from getting out, so I said, I'm going back to my hole. And one of my buddies came back with me. And then all of a sudden, we started seeing them everywhere. We were surrounded, so we started firing. About an hour into it, just about the time it was turning dark, my platoon sergeant was directly behind me, which was the command post, with an officer and a couple of his assistants. And they had a machine gun set up right over my hole that was coming right over the top. So I crawled out to the side with an M79 grenade launcher and fired, and apparently hit something or somebody. It looked like the machine gun exploded. And that was really a bonanza for the people behind us, because they had no cover. They had no foxhole. They were hiding behind a tree. 2 of them came and got in our foxhole, so we had basically 4. Before they got there, we got hit by a mortar. After I had crawled back into the hole, they fired a mortar round, and it hit to the left of us and back a ways. Mortars will, once they hit, will blow back toward the way they came. It took a good share of a chunk of meat off of my buddy's head. I got it in the side of the head, and we were both laying at the bottom of the foxhole. What Viet Cong are notorious for being able to do is just by looking at it, they can adjust their round. We'll adjust it sometimes by saying, oh, it's a football field to the left or to the right. They'll adjust it by the inch, and it will be almost dead on. The next round that came in landed right on top of our foxhole, blew dust and debris in on it. We didn't figure it out until the next morning when we saw the spent shell, how close we were to being taking all of us out of there. Well, there was only 2 of us. So we got my friend evacuated, and then the platoon sergeant and his radio man came up and got in our hole, and then we started calling in the Air Force rounds from there, because it was pretty. You could just see how many they were all around us. And when they evacuated, or not the company commander, whoever was in charge then, because we were all divided and had different people in different units, and he surveyed the surrounding ground around us and said there'll be 100% casualties here unless we get some help. So they got in, they dropped some rounds, and I mean almost on top of us, which was about what you had to do. By morning, we went out and policed the area. There were about half a dozen dead Viet Cong, and there had to have been 100. I don't know how they drag them away, but that was one of their modes of operation, is to drag their dead with them and bury them somewhere. But and after that, we were basically airlifted out and away, so we didn't get involved in any of the other fighting. We got probed where we landed that night. They came in with a couple of VC. We found footprints the next morning, but there was no shooting whatsoever. We heard them, and that was about it. And that's always the scary thing when you hear and you can't see. You just want to say, stand up and let's get this thing over one way or the other. But and that was basically it. The next day they airlifted us back to our base camp, and we mustered out.
So what is General Moore like? Was he there? I mean,
He was a great guy. He was there. In our situation, we'd rarely see him because we're either on patrol or in our own little unit. His command post was miles away from ours. The only place we had was a company commander, 2 or 3 other units that came in and out. We never mingled. We were in basically our tents. We slept on the ground. Everything that I had on me that I owned, I wore. And when I left for the States, I had to wear khakis. I had one set of khakis. Everything else rotted away. So we were, being there in '65, they didn't have time to erect permanent barracks. They didn't have time to get that many hot meals to you. They did a pretty good job of it, I'll have to admit, and it was fairly decent. Of course, anything would be if you're eating C rations. But the conditions were very primitive, and if we went out for as many, sometimes as 30 days, we never had change of clothes. So you can imagine how rank people get to smelling. But you even had your own body odor that didn't bother you. So it was really just taking cold showers and shaving out of a helmet were just a way of life, and just something you get used to. You adapt to it. You really do start living like an animal.
How old are you now?
I'm 64.
So you were how old during?
I would have been 20, 25.
I'm going to jump back and come back to, how do you pronounce it? Yadrang?
Yadrang.
Okay, I want to come back to that. But when you went to Vietnam, was it like 1 tour, 2 tours?
One. We were there for 5 months. We got there the end of, I think the first part of, late August, early September. So actually we were there less than that. We came back in mid-December.
Okay, were you like some of the World War II guys? Did you feel invincible when you got there? Or tell me about when you physically landed in Vietnam, what you thought, smelled, saw. I mean, what was your impression of that area?
Well, we came by ship, and we landed in Queen Anne, and we had practice firing off the ship all the way over, and when we got to Queen Anne, we were out of ammunition for the most part. So we were allowed to put a couple of rounds in our rifle. I had a grenade launcher and a pistol. We could have carried basically anything we wanted. plus the M16. So they trucked us over to on K, and had following by air support, because it was basically an unsecured territory. So that night they put us in the interior of the base camp, and we were probed there, but we didn't have enough ammunition to defend, so the people that were there did. And then we were finally, after like 2 or 3 days, we're finally issued ammunition to support a patrol or any type of a confrontation. But not invincible at all. We were all scared to death, and primarily because we didn't know what to expect. And it got even worse when because many of us we started fighting among ourselves, because some of us would go out on a patrol and you would see some things and get fired at, and others would see nothing and swore that we were all getting spooked. And when we got probed a couple of times, we were guarding what we called the green line, which is our outer security in our base camp. We'd get fired upon, and then they would say, no, it wasn't anybody, it was somebody else playing a joke on you or something. So nobody believed anybody about what was going on, and you can imagine how rumors get started and what happens. So we finally got hit one night, and we were able to find some of the expended ammunition. Nothing, they didn't penetrate, but they certainly got everybody's attention from then on, and we kind of got on the same page. But it wasn't really until the Ia Drang that we finally got everybody believing that the enemy was really for real. We had one guy that didn't build a foxhole, and when we got hit that night after the Ia Drang battle, he was a true believer, because it scared him to death, because they were just raking. He had nothing but boards piled up, and that became almost a cinder pile by the time they were done.
And Jim, can you tell me about the Hueys, as far as their role, taking the wounded out, and how that happened at Ia Drang or whoever? Mm-hmm. Just take me through how that works.
Well, they basically, some of these, during the Ia Drang, these Red Cross people were absolutely amazing. It's like painting a bullseye on your back, and they come in with that red and white cross, and they would drop right in the middle of the action, and people would race out there with the wounded or the dead, and just throw them on. And I mean, those things were leaking blood like it was water rolling out, because people are unable to get first aid. You've got medics around, but they're scattered here and there, and they were just hauling them. Just as soon as they could take them out and getting back to a location where they could be attended to, then they were on their way back in. Now that was probably for that 2-day period. I mean, that was a nightmare for those people, and those guys definitely should be heroes. But the Hueys are, they're not. They hold basically 9 people sitting for bodies. They must have had to pile them on top of each other to get them out.
Were there corpsmen in the field like they were in World War II when those men were wounded?
We had one with us going to the ambush. In fact, he and I were, when the mortar round hit, it took 2 people on either side of us and left us. We didn't get hit by it, and both of those were dead. And so he was helping try to take care of all the people that were wounded. The people down in the Ia Drang itself in the ambush, I'm not real sure. They had them, but I don't know if they didn't come under fire themselves and were unable to assist. But there were just so many bodies that even if they had a full complement of corpsmen, I don't think it was the same as it was in World War II.
That's interesting to me. And then if somebody's hit or wounded, is it your responsibility to stop and help them? Did you
Yes.
have morphine on you? Did you have anything medical?
The only thing we had were bandages, things that for sucking chest wounds. Didn't have any medication like morphine. That's when we'd get a corpsman out, and my buddy didn't have anything with his head. He was holding his hand up to his head like this, and the blood was rolling down like somebody was pouring pop down it. So I got the bandage on it, and we're supposed to encourage him and tell him they're going to be okay. I just said, "You're bleeding like a stuffed pig," and he said, "Well, thank you very much." And he started going into, you could see he was going into shock. So we got him out of there, because with that bandage was almost like orange, so it was standing out pretty prominently at night. So we got him evacuated back to the back end of where our base was, and they did have somebody back there full time, a couple of people working on him back there. But I think everybody did everything. If you happened to be back there and you were partially wounded, you'd probably be attending to the rest of them that were coming in yourself to help out, just to get them under control before they go into shock. But we had a guy shot in the butt, a guy shot through the ear, and he stayed and fought. It was a sniper, and one of our guys who was considered probably one of the bigger nerds of the group, but he was just such a neat guy, and he became one of those battlefield heroes. He spotted the sniper, took him out, spotted mortar rounds when they were coming in, and yelled everybody get down, and that probably saved countless lives, because we're all sticking our heads out of our foxholes, and would really have would have probably taken a lot more casualties through the mortar rounds.
Well, you obviously were close enough to those Hueys to see the wounded and all that. Were you helping,
Yeah.
assisting, or just watching?
No, we went over at the end of the battle in the Drang. The next morning we went through and policed all the way through and found all the bodies. There were very few that were alive, and most of them. So then we would take our ponchos and put the bodies in them and then haul them to Hueys. It'd take 3 and 4 guys hauling one guy because they're dead weight. And we did that for nearly 2-3 hours at least. So it was a very sobering activity, especially with people that you're carrying that you know.
When those Hueys come in, did you just get used to the sound? Or
Yeah.
I mean, to me, they make a dramatic sound.
They really do. And of course, the wind that they generate, it blows anything within 10, 20 yards. So, you just basically get down, stay down until they're in, depending on what they're doing. A lot of times they're bringing in more ammunition, or they're bringing in food, or they're coming in to get people to evacuate. So,
I asked this question, I think, or one of the veterans of Vietnam told me this about, being back home, and he told me on a warm night where there's no wind and they hear the crickets and maybe a helicopter goes over, it kind of brings it all back. Are there things in life now that trigger any memories of Vietnam, like what I described, a helicopter ahead? Or
yeah, we have a police helicopter here in Omaha that makes the rounds. It seems like he's hovering over our house every night of the week. I mean, I hear that thing, and it doesn't. When he really comes, if he's coming and going past us at a fairly high rate of speed, it doesn't bother me. But when he starts hovering, when he's looking for something or someone, they'll hover, and it just reminded me of helicopters coming in, or us coming into a base camp or a landing zone. Any loud noises spook me. For years, I'd even almost hit the ground. And that's just a natural reflex. But even now, a noise in the house or something, if it's loud, I'll jump out of my skin. But that's something you never get used to. Nothing. I've not, fortunately, not had to run into anybody firing weapons. So I know that was always, there was a special sound with the AK-47s that nobody will ever forget. And it just, when you heard those, we would hear firing a lot at night. You wouldn't hear much in the way of helicopters moving, because obviously they're less effective without any sense of direction as far as where they're going or where they're searching, because that's not their role. Basically, it's to transport from one area to another. But that doesn't bother me. But just hearing the sound of a helicopter, more than one, always gets my attention.
Why was I'm trying to remember the name of all these guys in this book that Joe Galloway and Hal Moore wrote. Did you read the book too? We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
Yeah, I didn't read the book. We had copies. Our unit, because we were there, we sent a note to the guy that did, and he sent us back hats. It said we were soldiers once with the 1st Air Cav emblem. But I definitely wanted to make it a point to go to go see the movie. But there was another book that was out called Play Coup, which was based a lot on the Drang Valley, and had some of the facts in there were very accurate. I think more so than some of this commentary that came from some of our people. But I've heard the book is more accurate than the movie was. Gets into more detail.
Well, have you heard Larry? Do you know who Larry Gwynn is?
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Crandall. Well, these men were brought out in the book and in the movie. They were some of the characters. Bruce Crandall was the helicopter pilot.
Right.
And there were others. My mind right now, I can't remember all the names. I've read the book, I've seen the movie, but talking to you, you were there. just kind of wonder why some things come to the forefront and others don't. But because you know how we are in society, we're almost like not idolized, but it's like, well, this was the way it was. But you know, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I know, like you said, if we had 4 different guys, they'd probably say four different accounts of what happened. So it's interesting to me. Do you go to any of the reunions?
I've been going less and less, primarily because I'm usually doing some type of activity with my job. We've grown. I'd say our group now is probably smaller than 20 that are still alive.
Yeah, you mean the first Air Cat?
That were there, first company, B company, first to the
Your
fifth.
company.
Yeah, our company.
Because there were first to the 7th.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
Now, just our little unit, we have our reunions anywhere from Des Moines to Branson. Most of the people came from Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska. My 2 buddies, we went through high school together. We went through basic training. We went through advanced infantry training from the same hometown. Went to Nam together. And I got malaria on the way back, so we were separated then. But we were with each other for the 2.5 years of the time. And that's when I'm a little tired of the reunions because we haven't been around each other. There was a terrific bond for the first few years of the reunion, and nobody missed it. Then after some of the stories, started to get embellished, it then became less and less fun for me. In fact, I think, suppressing memories for so many years before we ever had the reunion, nobody wanted to talk about it. If you got a hold of somebody and said, we're going to have one, a lot of them, the answer could be more likely no than it would be yes, I'll be there, because nobody wanted to dredge up all that took place and some of the stuff that we saw. So I think that I don't think location is a problem. I just think people are tired of it.
But isn't there a national reunion once a year in November around that time where everybody of the 1st to the 5th or the 1st to the 7th, they all get together?
Well, they just had, for the very first time, they just had one, and I think it was in Branson, and it was because it's been so long, almost 30 years, well, 40 years. And I think, I think it was $100 to register. I was very indifferent to it. I thought, why after all these years, why did it take you 40 years to do it? And it was we would have died for that in 75 or 85, but because we had never been welcomed back. And so we thought that would have been so neat, but and now it's pretty hard to get everybody organized to the point where we still got about I'd say there are 4 people that I am in touch with every now and then on news and regarding Vietnam or veterans and of that type of nature. And yeah, we're going to have a reunion. Well, guys, they set out a block of rooms and hardly, probably 70% don't show. So I think it's run its course. There's a couple of guys that I still stay in contact with, and we kibitz back and forth about each other's lives, but that's about it. We don't discuss the war.
Tell me about, now this is something that I don't have a lot of facts on, so I want to hear it from you, but was there a problem with drug usage in Vietnam?
I don't think when we were there was much. There was a lot of marijuana use. There were drugs. I've never used them. My surrounding buddies, at least in my squad, never used them. But I'm so naive about it. I could tell that some of the ones that were, just by their actions, a little more, loose, crazy, and taking chances. So I could tell that they were on something. I would not be able to tell you if there was an upper or a downer, but I think in subsequent years it became very prevalent, and I think that was just a sign of the times. It probably was happening back here. Obviously, more drug usage with more sophisticated type of drugs, but there was definite, and even in '65 they were using it. But our unit was we were too dedicated toward the purpose of getting back home. But of course, we just like with any soldier, if they've got money in their pocket, they're going to be spending it on something, and that's what we used it for, because we didn't have much to spend it on anyway. We didn't have such things as R&R, because we were just there for a short period of time. If we would have, I don't know where we would have gone. I think we went into An Khê once, the town, which was very little. When we got back to Saigon, we had about maybe a day to ourselves. So we didn't really have any opportunity to. That's probably where you would have found a lot of it, is in Saigon.
Jim, try to walk me through you coming home and what type of reception you got, and what, if something, what happened when you came home? Walk me through it.
We flew into. They made sure we left Saigon. I think we ended up in Midway for breakfast, and then we stayed there for a while until we could get cleared. And then when we came into Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco, they timed our arrival to be somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, because of the Cal Berkeley students were pelting the soldiers with eggs and yelling all types of things and signs and anti-war. Moved us through customs. I had an AK-47 that I brought back with me, and my platoon sergeant said, you'll probably never get it through customs, but break it down as far as you can. And so when we came through, I filled out the forms and just put souvenir weapon, and they never even looked in my bag. So I had a illegal automatic weapon in my bag and brought home and had it for years and years, until I finally decided it was way too big of a risk to go to jail for. So never fired it. But when they took us to Oakland Army Terminal, I was there, was sick. I knew I'd gotten malaria on the way back, and I was too sick to get out of bed, and they finally took my temperature, and I was at 105, so they took me over to Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio, and I was there for about 3 months before I got home. And then when I got home, I started making arrangements. I was home in March or April, and started making arrangements to go back to the University of Iowa. So I went over to see if I could get my old radio job back, and did, and started working during the summer. Ironically, the guy that was the announcer on the desk, I would do the sports, and he would close out the day, 10 o'clock. And his last note the first day I was at work was that there will be an anti-Vietnam War rally at the steps of the old Capitol in Iowa City. So when we finished and walked out the door to go get a beer, I says, I would certainly like to meet that asshole who arranged this thing. And he said, I'm the asshole, believe it or not. And he was. So we had a very heated discussion for an hour, and it was ugly. And then after we spent our energy, we kind of started seeing the other viewpoint. He understood what it would have been like to, police up your dead friends, and I kind of understood being that far removed from anything, that the war was very unpopular, as you know, and so it wasn't. I did not broadcast to the world that I was a Vietnam vet, and so we kept very much to ourselves because of how unpopular the soldiers were, and so that was basically the reception that we received, and that's why I think many of us were still bitter after all those years and didn't want to have the reunion, didn't feel good about it. But then, after not talking about it, then we wanted to talk. We wanted an outlet. And so we started, the best way to do it is among ourselves, rather than, a lot of people would ask me, and they still do, what was it like? And I said, the saddest part was that, some of the young people that asked, I said, most of my friends were your age, and they didn't come back. And I think that really hits home to some of them, where they still don't ever get the feel, because you don't know what it's like till somebody's shooting at you, how you're going to react. But it's never bothered me to talk about it as much as it has some of my buddies who probably would never do this, never even think about it.
Jim, why do you think you survived and came back?
Luck. I think it was because there were so many times, so many close calls where, within inches, I would have taken it. I have no idea. I think I've always been. I'm certain. I wouldn't say I'm religious, but I'm certainly. I don't miss mass every Sunday. But we all, were saying prayers at night. I remember the night of the where we got hit really bad. One of my friends said, he says, I don't want to die here, but if that's what's going to happen, take me. But he just started digging his hole so he could fill. I think it was big enough for 2. When he finished, it was big enough for 6, and because he was scared. But you just have that little thing, that moment, where life's not in your hands. And I've always wondered why me, And why not some of these other people that I saw that we partied with that never made it? It's one of those frequency or freak happenings in war. Some people get it, some people don't.
Looking back on Vietnam and just being a veteran and an American citizen, and I've asked the World War II guys the same question, but what does freedom mean to you?
Well, if you've been over there, and you see how afraid some of the natives are, that they don't have the right to speak up and to speak their mind. They don't have a thought of their own. When I see how they live, I see all the things that we have and how spoiled we are. That to me is being able to sit down and have a discussion with somebody who's diametrically opposed to you is fun for me. I've gotten over the one-sided, narrow, arrogant way of thinking to the point where I'm able to open up and listen to somebody and understand where they're coming from, and the fact that I'm never going to convince them or change their mind about war, or are they going to change my mind? So it's just nice to be able to do that and to have all the luxuries that we have here and the opportunities.
And you saw men die and were wounded. What would you tell a young person today that knows nothing about war, and yet they live in a free country, they take their freedoms for granted? What would you tell a young person today about the price for freedom?
He's got an obligation. He doesn't. He may not agree with it, but he's got an obligation to give back something for what he's got and what he probably doesn't appreciate. And I would tell him in no uncertain terms that run, don't walk to the nearest place and sign up to do some type of volunteer. And for the people who are pacifists and conscientious objectors, that's fine, but maybe do something that contributes to service of this country.
Well, you saw men wounded, bleeding, dying, and the price for freedom is expensive. It's not free. It's just amazing to me, and yet our young people have no idea that that you shed your blood in Vietnam, World War II, Korea, and do you think it's important that we remember what happened in Vietnam?
Oh, absolutely. From the mistakes that were made over there by our government, by some of the things that we did. It changes you as a person. You become less human. I would have no compunction whatsoever to blow somebody's head off from what I saw with our guys dying. If I hadn't seen any of that, I'm sure that would have been an issue. But we hunted as if we wanted to kill somebody. Did it, saw it. I didn't have one bit of remorse. They were trying to do the same to us, and it's basically kill or be killed, and especially in the short period of time we were there and what they were trying to get us to do to see what type of an impact we made. So we had a job to do, and that's what we did. Is
it a survival instinct that kicks in, or is it your training that makes you like that predator?
I think there's a survival thing that comes about us. I was point on a lot of the patrols, mainly because I wanted to be. Not that I wanted the activity, but I wanted to. I felt confident in my ability to go and get to a destination and get back safely. Seeing potential danger spots, ambush points. I didn't want to be in the middle of that group. I wanted to be up front, and even possibly on the flank. The flanks are probably where they get hit first. The point man they may let through, but I think more the training was excellent. Our platoon sergeant was a veteran, Korea, and probably one of the finest soldiers I've ever been around, and one of those that did everything by the book. We were tired. We started bunching up together. He would stop us, and it was almost like we were back in Fort Benning and being yelled at. But you didn't mind it by him because we all wanted to live. So we did win awards when we were in the States for the way we soldiered, and so we thought we were good at what we did, and we were, and that's probably one of the reasons why we did survive.
What does the American flag mean to you?
It's hard for me to. I get a little bit emotional sometimes. When we're at sporting events, and I see the flag and what it stands for. I mean, it's just basically a symbol. But I've never been able to, it's kind of like if somebody wanted to express their religion, I'd have a hard time doing that. Have a hard time explaining, patriotism. It's something that's, in me. When the plane flies over, I almost always just get real teary-eyed because it's just so emotional. Maybe it's the connection, I remember I said the first Air Force guy I see, I'm going to buy him a bottle of booze because, the Air Force saved our butts more than on one occasion. The whole thing about, people coming together under, duress, like our bond with our Vietnam buddies, it's powerful. We have very little in common with each other, except one thing. We went to war together and we survived it. And so that's something that we share and you couldn't take away. I mean, to this day, if we were attacked, we'd probably all band together and say, let's all go down and go back again, But it's just, try to look at the flag and try to explain how you feel about it is very difficult. But it's certainly appreciation for what we've got.
Are you proud that you served our country and you are a Vietnam veteran?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We've got a guy here in town who's a prominent attorney who writes, every Memorial Day or any Veterans Day, he'll write an article about some of his experiences. I've never cared necessarily to do that. I probably would have if somebody would have asked me, but I would not volunteer it. But yeah, I'm very, very proud of being over there, and the experience that you get is incredible. Certainly makes you grow up. We were all very immature. A lot of us, I think I was one of the older ones at 25. Most of them were probably in their 20, 21, 22 years old, in that area. And then when we left, we were being replaced by a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds who had no training whatsoever. And I really felt for those guys because they just didn't have a clue. And I'm sure that we lost a lot of people because of their inexperience.
Has anybody ever thanked you for your service in Vietnam?
Mm-hmm. I've had quite a few. And I think, all of a sudden, I think maybe the 9/11 thing has brought out to some people just how vulnerable we can be. And I think it's made some people sit back and say, I've had a couple of people who just out of the clear blue say, I really want to thank you for, and it's almost embarrassing. So, it's almost like you crave this recognition, and then when you don't get it, and then all of a sudden you get it, you can't handle it. You just don't handle it very well. But it's a powerful experience for me, and I'm appreciative of the people that acknowledge it now.
When you read the Michael Kelly's column,
Mm-hmm.
what were your thoughts, Jim, about contacting me, and why did you contact me?
Almost immediately, because I thought, here is someone that's taken the trouble, and it's not only the first time. You've done it, as you showed me, 2 or 3 times that you've done it. The amount of work that you did, and that someone would care enough to get somebody's experiences and go to the work. And I can't imagine how much work it is. It's got to be incredible. I've done some things like this in preparing stories, but nothing of this magnitude that you have to do. I was overwhelmed. Number one, I'm a Mike Kelly fan anyway, but number two, when I saw your name, that's about the first thing I did. I think I emailed you almost immediately after reading the article and could not wait until today just to see who you were and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. We're about done. We got about 5 more minutes, but why did, again, it seems like a lot of Vietnam vets came back and they were messed up, man. That's what you hear. Well, do you think it was a combination of maybe drugs, stress, they didn't get the help they needed? Why do you think people, what happened to these people?
I think all of the above. They certainly didn't get the help they needed when they came back. I think drugs was probably a big part of it. A dissociative reaction. Drugs, alcohol. A lot of the people I went through a period of depression. It was quite a ways after Nam. I mean, it must have been 15, 18 years. My wife got tired of me moping around and said, "Get the hell out and get some help." And so I went and talked about it. And so the counselor ended up telling me, I can't believe that you've survived all this. With all the stuff you've been through, and started telling me some of the problems that people have had, the drug and the alcohol abuse and the divorces, and and actually becoming recluses. A lot of these people have been, and I think at some point in time you have to help yourself, and just get over it. Some of these people who say, the veterans committees and let them down, didn't provide them the necessary medical or psychological counseling that they needed. I don't know. I just think that at some point in time you got to do it yourself. I mean, get on with your life. And not too many people. There were a lot of people that didn't. They just could never get over it. And a lot of people won't even, to this day, you couldn't get them to talk about it. So I think talking about it and getting it out in the open is very healthy.
Tell me about the Vietnam Wall. Have you seen it?
Yes.
Tell me your experience.
Well, and ironically, for the first time, I saw it back in August. I think it was at the end of August. The U.S. Army, they were a sponsor of mine for some of the stuff that I do, and we became friends with the recruiting man for the U.S. Army here in Omaha, and so they had a trip to Washington, D.C. So I said, you won't believe this, but I've never been back. So I want to see it. I had a chance to go with James Martin Davis, the attorney here, and I wish I would have done it. I didn't at the time. So when we got over there, we saw so many great things, Arlington Cemetery and a few of the other things around, a couple of bases, Army bases. But when we got to the wall, it was dark, and so it was not a great time to see anything. And I had a list of people that I wanted to look up, and then I also had a list of people that we never found contact with. So I thought, well, it'd be really. So as we were getting ready to go to walk down in the dark, I got to thinking. Gal said, "Why aren't you up there looking?" And I said, "Well, I just happened to think the three people that I've never had contact with might be up here on the wall, and I don't think I want to know that." So we walked down a little farther, and I said. She said, "Here's a volunteer that's standing over here. He can help you find what you're looking for." So I gave him the names, and he went right to it. And he had those little pieces of paper that you walk, and then you pencil over them, and the imprint of the signature comes through. So we were doing that, and then he turned to me and he said, "I said, would their names be very close to this panel?" And he said, "Well, it depends on when they died." And I said, "Well, this would have been in November of '65." And he turned to me and he said, "You remember Colonel Stryker?" I said, "No." But I said, "I remember the colonel who had a mule that we used to airlift with one of the helicopters." And he said, "Ia Drang." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Me too." So here we are in the dark. I mean, can you imagine? And we had a nice little reunion and mentioned names. And, Colonel Moore, of course, everybody knew the colonel, and some of the other down the ladder from him, and it was just so powerful that this, that you'd run into this, that far away. I mean, it could have been an hour later, an hour earlier, and it probably would have been so uneventful it wouldn't be memorable. But I'll just never forget seeing the wall and how they had. And he was telling me all the problems that they have. They didn't want him to put heroes. They didn't want to say in honor of. He said, we've had to battle just to get recognition for the Vietnam vets, and so which, is incredulous. I mean, I just can't imagine this time, but that to me was one of the most moving experiences I've ever had, that 4 days we were there.
Can I have you do one more thing? I've
Sure.
asked all the veterans,
Okay.
World War II, Korea, and now Vietnam. At the end of my films, I ask you guys to give me a salute into the camera.